So one of the hardest things to do, I think, with game design is starting from a blank slate. It's really hard to just have nothing and just come into something and start working. I think once you have an idea and you have like a prototype that's working, then it's really easy to make changes and fix your prototype, fix problem. So getting from just a basic idea into a prototype as fast as you can is really the best way to go. Whether it's just buying blank cards and writing on them, or doing something digital like we did, just getting past the idea of just having something in your head and trying to play it, to really actually playing it physically is the best thing you can do to really make progress. One of the advantages our game has is it's 1v1. I think if you have a game that's with multiple players, 4 players, or even a solo game, it's really, really hard to iterate on that if you're trying to do that alone. And so when we designed our game, we had 2 designers and then we have 2 players. So it worked really well to just go back and forth. I'd play a turn, he'd play a turn, we'd kind of talk about what didn't work. What someone liked, what someone didn't like, But when you have that multiplayer sort of loop, they talk about the game loop. When you're doing design and you're working together, you can really repeat that loop over and over when you're playing against someone else and really get the feel for what it would be like in reality. And I think that game design is all about interesting decisions. And that's something we really tried to incorporate in all the cards. So every card is a decision where it's split half and half. But it's really hard to simulate what someone's decisions will be if you're just designing alone. And if you're not, playing the game how it should be played, if you're playing a 4-player game trying to simulate all the turns. So I think that's something that's really valuable in design, and something that I think going to that 1v1 setup was really a benefit for us. The challenge that we faced is the rules. Writing the rules, expressing the rules, that's really hard to do, and I did not anticipate how difficult that would be. And as a designer, in looking at games that are designed really well, a lot of people can pick them up and play them, and then the game will enforce the rules for you, and you don't have to keep going back to the manual. So in a lot of the cards, what we've done with the design is to kind of take in a question that we get a lot, a problem people face where they're like, can I do this? Can I pay a charge to draw a card? I say, no, you can't do that, because that seems like something you would be able to do at charge. So what we did instead was made a core that lets you do that. So that would tell the player without having to look at the rules, well, if a core lets you do that, you normally can't do that. And so we did that with a bunch of different equipments and cores and mechs, and really tried to let the game teach you how to play. And it's really hard to do, but I think we've done a pretty good job expressing that. Another problem I ran into was really the lore of the game. That wasn't really my strong suit, and it took a long time to really nail down a story, and we still haven't really done anything really, really concrete. Like some games have a really deep lore base, but I ended up looking to another friend from college whose name is James Pianka, and he's actually a professional narrative designer, and his work is just amazing. He's written flavor text for Magic cards and done a lot of other cool stuff. A really awesome writer. So I asked him to help, and he ended up naming all the cards, which might be something you guys haven't seen yet, that I'm really excited about. He really nailed all the card names and really put some cool stuff in there, so you can really tell the cards apart, and they really have their own personality and have some really cool language in there. But he also helped us kind of solidify the overall setting of the game, because we weren't really sure where the world existed. You know, is it a one world? Is it, you know, out in the depths of space or whatever? And that's really what we ended up deciding on, was that Outchasers are kind of, you know, leaving planets and going out in space alone, you know, venturing to grab cores that way, which gives it this cool context of kind of the lone wolf. So when we took Outchasers to Comic-Con the first time, we still had these equipment types named rock, paper, scissors, and it was just the biggest barrier for people. They're just like, what are you doing? Like, this game is awesome, but this piece is just so dumb. Like, it's such a leftover placeholder. And so since then, we've changed it to Geo, Electro, and Pyro, and then from there we got to our final version, which is a little more, you know, lore-ish, a little more, you know, setting. It has a feeling to it, so it's tectonic, incendiary, and quantum. And so that's a little more sci-fi. So most of the work I've been doing since all the conventions has been balancing each card. And it's just a huge challenge to do, and because you really don't know the repercussions of your changes until you're playing it, and a lot of times it'll take a few people to really find those problems, and so I'm really thankful that I've had such great testers as we've gone, and they've, you know, given me such great suggestions, because it's super hard. One of the hardest things we did with Outchasers in the game design perspective was tuning mechs and pilots. When you have the system set and you want to break those rules with abilities, it's really hard to come up with something that's interesting and fun without making it completely worthless or way, way too strong. And we've definitely made both of those as we've gone through design. But one of the pilots that caused us the most trouble was Hagar. So originally, when we took it to Comic-Con, Hagar's ability was to grab an armor out of your discard and equip it as an armor. That just caused the games to slow way down. And not only does that make the game more boring, it also makes the demos really bad, because people end up at the table for, you know, an hour straight doing just back and forth, you know, trading cards basically, and it just wasn't fun at all. So we ended up changing Hagar, and now I think he's one of the most fun pilots in the game. And basically what you can do is strike from the top card of your discard, and then shuffle that card back into your deck. And that one's really interesting because if someone, if your opponent, you know, is able to destroy an equipment, they have some control over what the card is on the top of your discard. So it's got a little bit of counterplay to it that I think is really interesting. And then it also lets you, you know, strike more, which I think is more fun. It keeps the style pretty aggressive as opposed to just building up your armors and basically doing nothing but staying alive. It did lead us to the problem where everyone just started striking and striking and striking, and that makes the game really, really fast. So when you have that, then we had to tune back on strikes and on card draw. So basically without resources, the resources in our game that we use are the cards themselves. So it's just your turn and then your cards. So if you end up striking, you can really, if you strike multiple times, you can really burn yourself out and just have nothing left in your hand, and then end up out of options by the end of the game. And so that's something that the game's much, you know, the balance of it is much closer to where we want it to be now, since we've had all this time since Comic-Con. And I think it's really in a lot better place. Another pilot we were working on is Hexia, and she had a lot of different changes. So she originally started it, and she could just strike your mech and avoid your armors completely just by using charge. But she had to have incendiary strikes. So the demo version we're playing doesn't have a draft, so you just get random cards. So if you got a lot of incendiary strikes, you could just win the game without having to actually play it and destroy armors or do anything. So we added the condition that she needs to get 2 cores before she could do that. And that one just was a little bit too slow. It would take her a while to get the cores, and she couldn't really do much damage in that time, and then she'd be way behind and then just lose. So that was a really difficult card, but I think she's in a really good place now. So I'm a big fan of some of the bigger games out there, some big video games like League of Legends. And so I've read a lot of what those designers are doing and their thought process behind their designs. And one thing they had emphasized is that taking away players' actions is just not fun. So we've had a few examples of that in our gameplay because sometimes as a designer you fall into that trap. But if you can avoid taking away actions for the player, your game's going to be much better off. So we had a trap that would just end the player's turn. And it felt cool at the beginning because it really felt like your traps had consequences, and that's something we were trying to emphasize. And what we saw was people were just kind of bummed out when it happened. It wasn't a good thing. It never was a good thing. Even the player who set the trap wasn't excited about it happening. And I think that once we removed that trap and stopped doing things like that, our game really was better because of it. So from a game design perspective, what I'm most excited about with Outchasers is really just how many options you have to play with a small set of cards. And that was our goal from the beginning, was to make a set of cards that's not so expensive, that plays like a trading card game, but has a ton of options. So you can play them randomly with all sorts of different pilot combinations, pilots and mechs, and then you can draft the cards, which I think that's how most of the more advanced players are playing, and it really helps them, play strategically as far as randomly. And then you can also add, 2 pilots, or you can really do whatever you want at that point with the cards. And I think it's flexible enough that it supports that, which is also something I've really enjoyed about designing and testing with people. Sometimes people will just, they feel like they're part of the design, and they feel excited to just try things, and they feel like a designer a little bit, where they'll say, oh, I had this idea, why don't we play all quantum versus all incendiary versus all tectonic, and we'll play a 3-way game. And I'm like, okay, that sounds fun. So you can do that with these cards, and I hope that when people do play, that they get in that mindset where you can really just use these however you want to.
My name is Nick Greico, and I'm a musician, producer, and I am one of the designers of Outchasers. So I met Cooper around day 1 at Berklee College of Music in 2006, and we hit it off when we were talking about music and bands that we liked, and then we started playing World of Warcraft together, and that basically set the pace for our entire friendship, music and games. So Outchasers all started when Cooper and I were chatting via Skype, and he said he wanted to start a card game that was pick up and play, that played like a collectible card game. And I with all of my experience in card games, mainly like Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and stuff like that, I was really into that sort of thing, so I was all about it. And when he asked for my help in designing everything, I was really excited to try my hand at designing cards. When it came to working on the cards, my perspective was a lot more focused on a competitive nature, because I was a very competitive player with initially Yu-Gi-Oh! And then Pokemon card game and Magic the Gathering in the end. And I've always enjoyed the deck building process and the competitive head-to-head nature of all those card games. So the trick for me was looking at the cards that we were making and trying not to balance them around my perception of these other card games that I had been playing my whole life, and trying to just avoid turning them into Magic cards, or in general, creating a card game that was separate from the mechanics that I had grown up getting used to my whole life. So the first time that I ever watched anybody play the game was when I brought it to two close friends of mine, and they had been playing card games with me growing up, so they seemed like the best candidates to playtest on. And they enjoyed the game, and they had a lot to say, and they had criticisms, which was awesome. But they were also my friends, so that probably had a lot of influence on how they reacted to the game. But the first real time I got to see the game in action with people who I didn't know was at Gen Con Indy in Indianapolis, and it was pretty crazy being thrown into the fire and just sitting down with people with the game, teaching them how to play, and then having them sit down and love it. It was pretty astounding, and it made me think, wow, I created something that is entertaining, that people actually might want to play again, and they did. A lot of people wanted to play again. People came back to our tables and wanted to meet up with us and play more, and that was really rewarding, to kind of create a little universe and a unique style of gameplay that made people want to come back and keep trying it out. And it helps that the game itself, it lends itself to playing multiple times, because there is a learning curve and there is multiple ways of playing it, and there's every single game is different, so naturally if somebody enjoyed it the first time through, it can only get better from there. So that was really exciting to see that actually come to play. I definitely remember some of the biggest challenges going into the current form of the game was once we finally got to the 2 action cards, and started balancing them together, and then balancing the pilots and the mechs around them, and like basically making everything cohesive. The biggest problem was kind of the back and forth in balancing the pilots and the mechs, and then finding that one of the equipments was incredibly overpowered, and then we needed to tune that down, and then balance more of the equipments around that. And then once we had done that, felt like the gameplay was stale or too fast and too snowbally, and then going back and revisiting the pilots and the mechs, and then going back and revisiting the equipments, and it was just the constant overlap of balance that was necessary, and it took realizing that not every single card can be perfect, but every single card can have a solution and in the gameplay, and keep it as it is, and realize that in many times playing the game, there are answers within the cards. The better you know the cards, the better you'll be able to deal with any situation. Whether it's somebody getting an early game lead and figuring out how to come back from it, or getting an early lead and sustaining it. There's multiple ways to come out of anything, and whether it's just the pick up and play or the draft or the constructed, there's so many different possibilities, and we had to kind of let ourselves accept that. We had to realize that not every single game is going to go perfectly, and sometimes somebody is just going to get totally stomped, or sometimes the game is going to last forever and ever and ever, and that's the dynamic of the game, is that the better you understand what's going on within each of the cards, the more fun it's going to be. As this video is being taken, I haven't even met Brett yet, but Brett is the mastermind behind all of the characters that you see on the cards, and kind of creating the universe as we dictated it to him. And he did an amazing job, and I can't imagine how difficult it was for him dealing with us, tweaking every little thing, being nitpicky, and just, you know, creating these factions that that had their own personality. That was the biggest thing. We really wanted to have dynamic personalities within these 3 factions. Brett, as an artist, has a lot of insight into developing these characters, and he's done it a lot before, and for it being our first time, it was really awesome having his guidance on a lot of things, just kind of going through the process and being able to start from the ground up and creating like pages and pages of these potential characters, and then slowly watching them get crafted into these amazingly just dynamic and interesting looking creatures that it had a lot of depth, and I don't think we really appreciated that from the start, but once everything kind of came to life, thanks to Brett, it really tied everything together. And now the number one thing that people say when they are drawn to the game is the artwork, so we have him to thank for that. This game separates itself a lot from current card games because it's not a trading card game, for one. The fact that what you see is what you get in the opening pack, that forces people to think a lot more about what each specific card does and how they all work together. The realm of possibilities and how games can go and the way they synergize with each other. I don't know any games that are as modular as that, and I think that strategic diversity is what we were really aiming for from the start, was simple mechanics with a lot of gameplay depth.
Hi, I'm James Pianka. I'm a narrative game designer in Los Angeles, California. By day, I'm at Firefly Games, but I also write card names and flavor text for Magic the Gathering, NPC dialogue for Undead Labs, and content for the occasional indie title that lights me up. Outchasers roped me in to name the equipment cards, which actually pose a pretty fun narrative challenge. Because each card can be assigned to either an offensive or defensive slot, the naming had to accommodate both functions. So I used more committed nouns like howitzer and plating when the stats leaned heavily in one direction, but for the most part the language has this ambiguity, like paradox drive, or spite furnace, or aurora beacon, which really opens the narrative up to the player's choices. So an indie title like Outchasers offers really fun design opportunities for really synchronizing the narrative with the game mechanics. A lot of times you'll see in game development, you'll see the mechanics will come first and the story sort of tacks on later as wallpaper, and it's transparent, you can see that. Or vice versa, right? Maybe a game begins with a story and it struggles to find mechanics that do it justice, that serve it. And as a narrative designer, my goal is always to find a perfect unity between game mechanics and narrative, such that the game mechanics are manifesting what the story is trying to tell, and the story is illustrating what those mechanics are doing. So while working on Outchasers, because it's an indie title and because we know each other as developers and it's much more social and collaborative and not casual but definitely more informal design process, the development is a little looser, you can really go back and forth, it afforded us the opportunity to adjust game mechanics as the flavor and as the narrative started to come together. So for instance, there's a card in here called Nova Shard, whose mechanics derive from its name in such a way that as I was working, the name occurred to me and it seemed really rad, and I thought that the faction deserved a more explosive mechanic that the design space hadn't yet explored. And so I made a design suggestion to Cooper, and he agreed that it filled the spot. And so Novashard, in this sense, as a name, actually drove the game design itself, which is fun. It's nice to see it going both ways. In Outchasers, there's a conversation happening between the sparseness of its physical components and the narrative of venturing out into the void of space. When you play it on a clean table, there's nothing but your mech, your opponent's mech, and the resources you're fighting over.
Thank you for everyone who's watched this video and stayed a fan of Outchasers over the past year. We're giving away this really awesome piece of concept art that was originally done for our boxes. It's got Chromia and Thrax in this really cool scene, but we're giving that away for free, and it's a huge high-res image you can download in the links below. So stay tuned for the next video. We're going to be going over art. We're going to be showing some really cool old concepts, and then we'll be talking to Brett and getting his perspective on Outchasers, and then we'll be talking about his process and seeing some of his, where he works and what that's like. And then we'll also be giving away a really cool surprise in that video too that's even better than wallpapers. And remember, if you like this video or you hated this video just like Outchasers, or you're just mad the game's not out yet, let me know in the comments below. I love hearing from you guys, and if you'd share this video, I'd really, really appreciate it. Three, two, free, without cost for you. Over the course of the last, year,
That's the take. Basically, if you believe in the heart of the cards will reward you.